Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadesha Tarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so here we go. I see our Zoom camera is not really properly positioned, but I'm just here. What can I do? Anyway, you can see and you can hear. So here we go into chapter 7 of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, which is titled Knowledge of the Absolute. And we have an introduction here, some points to bear in mind, some statements from Prabhupada's purports also, a couple of them, a few of them, just to get us focused on the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita and the second section of Bhagavad Gita. So, we have seen in the first 6 chapters how the subject was different types of yogas, culminating in Bhakti Yoga. Of course, Srila Prabhupada, even though there were discussions on Karma Yoga, and there were discussions on Ashtanga Yoga, also on Jnana Yoga, something to do with Sankhya Yoga. These, of course, Ashtanga Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Ashtanga Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Sankhya Yoga, they're all connected together ultimately. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, his expertise as the most elevated pure devotee of the Lord was to show us how, one way or another, Bhakti Yoga was there. Yes. Are you okay there, Maharaj? The camera's not in the way? I mean, whatever you're comfortable with. Yeah, show us somehow or other. Krishna's there. Like is said about the Bhagavatam more specifically, but it applies also to Bhagavad Gita, that in every verse, it's just Krishna. So similarly, Bhagavad Gita, the Krishna is just pervasive. He's there. But ultimately, in the very last verse of the whole section, the last verse of the 6th chapter, Lord Krishna, in very specific terms, brought out Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness, pure devotional service, not something mixed, not something where you just offer the result and otherwise you just do your sort of normal material work and then you just give the result. Not that, but from beginning to end, morning to night, devotional service. Everything done in a mood of devotion to Krishna, where not only is the result an offering, but the effort is an offering also. Even Prabhupada would say about devotional service that in one sense, the result may not be so important. Because sometimes Krishna may test the devotee in this way or that, so the devotee learns lessons. So ultimately, the result may not be so important, but really what is important is how we try to give our hearts and give all our energy and our intelligence, just our whole being, give everything to Krishna in a mood of service. And as Krishna said in the 3rd chapter, that you are not entitled to the fruits. You're only entitled to the activity, the service itself. And the results, that's for Krishna. All right, so anyway, that's what we're going through. So then at the end, of course, of the 6th chapter, Lord Krishna said, of all people, the yogis are the best, and of all the yogis, the devotees are the best. And now Krishna is going to focus on devotional service. And we'll just see it from the very first verse. So from one purport of Prabhupada is actually from chapter 8, verse 28, which, we're going to be going into after, like next, we'll reach that particular verse sometime next week. So, but anyway, Prabhupada says there, chapters 7 through 12 are the essence of Bhagavad Gita. The first 6 and the last 6 chapters are like coverings for the middle 6 chapters, which are especially protected by the Lord. If one is fortunate enough to understand Bhagavad Gita, especially these middle 16 chapters, in the association of devotees, then his life at once becomes glorified beyond all penances, sacrifices, charities, speculations, etc. Because one can achieve all the results of these activities simply by Krishna consciousness. Yeah. So, right in the beginning of this chapter, right in the purport to the very first verse, and indeed right in the first sentence of the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the nature of Krishna consciousness is fully described. What a statement. That's just a super powerful statement. Then, well, in this chapter, there are 30 verses. It's an interesting thing to note how many verses in each chapter. In this chapter 30, in chapter 8, 28, in chapter 9, 34, in chapter 10, 42, in chapter 11, 55. That's the universal form chapter. And then in the 12th chapter, only 20. Only 20. 20 very important verses. So here anyway we have 30 verses in this 7th chapter, and in the very last verse, in the purport of verse 30, Srila Prabhupada says, this 7th chapter particularly explains how one can become a fully Krishna conscious person. The beginning of Krishna consciousness is association of persons who are Krishna conscious. Such association is spiritual and puts one directly in touch with the Supreme Lord. And by His grace, one can understand Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At the same time, one can really understand the constitutional position of the living entity and how the living entity forgets Krishna and becomes entangled in material activities. By gradual development of Krishna consciousness in good association, the living entity can understand that due to forgetfulness of Krishna, he has become conditioned by the laws of material nature. He can also understand that this human form of life is an opportunity to regain Krishna consciousness, and that it should be fully utilized to attain the causeless mercy of the Supreme Lord. Anyway, so, I mean, he says more, but that's a pretty good perspective, isn't it? So, I just one last thing I'll read before we go into the first verse. Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan says this in his purport to the first verse of the 7th chapter. Although Arjuna did not ask about what type of form should be worshipped and how to absorb the mind in that object, after these were mentioned by the Lord at the end of the last chapter, means in that last verse of the 6th chapter, verse 47, which is telling us that the devotees, the bhakti yogis, are the best yogis. So anyway, Krishna hasn't exactly, specifically told us what form of the Lord to concentrate on. But he continues, Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan, the Lord, eager to describe this out of his merciful nature, now begins to speak. Oh, and we'll see. Yes, there's so much nectar. It's very deep. It's very beautiful. And it's very inspiring for Krishna consciousness. All right, here we go, devotees. Verse 1 of chapter 7. I'll read the Sanskrit, why not? Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Maya Sakta Manaparta Yogam Yunjam Mad Ashraya Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yata Gyas Yasi Touch Trinu. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, now hear, O son of Prita, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. Yeah, well, we just read that very last thing, right? What Baladev Vijayabhushan said. What form of the Lord? What form of the Lord must we concentrate on? And Krishna says 3 times here, Mam, Mad Ashraya, Maya Sakta, to me, mind attached to me. Mad Ashraya, being sheltered by me. Asamshayam Samagram Mam, without doubt, knowing me in full. You know, according to Vedic standards, if something is said 3 times, it's like compulsory. It's absolutely definite. It's not like there's no sense of maybe or perhaps or it would be nice, but it's just absolutely that's it. So here Lord Krishna is making it very clear that we must focus on him, Krishna, the two-handed form with the flute, the beautiful cowherd boy of Vraja, who was there on the chariot of Arjuna. Even though he's the cowherd boy, we shouldn't think that it's a different person. Okay, now let's go through this. If you look, you'll see that Srila Prabhupada gives, it's a substantial purport. It's a substantial purport. There's some very important things to point out here. The first point is this, that Lord Krishna, having made that statement in the last verse of the 6th chapter, that Bhakti Yoga is the topmost yoga. Shraddhavan bhajate yo mam. That having made that clear, unequivocal statement, equivocal means speaking equally about different things, but unequivocal means you're pointing out one thing, not emphasizing a number of things. One thing is being pointed out. So pointing that out at the end of the 6th chapter, now in this first verse, it's the next verse in the whole Bhagavad Gita. In this first verse of the 7th chapter, Lord Krishna is actually explaining to us the essential elements in the performance, the practice of that best yoga. That best yoga, which, because yoga is better from the second to last verse of the 6th chapter. Yoga is better than just empirical knowledge. You know, that Sankhya or that Jnana. Yoga is better than austerities, these different things. Yoga is better. So, and of all yogas, Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness, pure devotional service is the best of all yogas. Therefore, it's the best of all, of everything. There's nothing higher. No other process higher or on the same level. So this verse 1 of chapter 7 is describing the main things which are done when one practices bhakti yoga, when one practices devotional service, when one practices Krishna consciousness. So what are they? What are they? Well, they're stated in the verse. First of all, one has to hear. In the Sanskrit, touch trinu, hear this. Hearing, of course, is the first activity in devotional service. We all know Prahlad Maharaj in the 7th chapter lists out the 9 forms of devotional service, the nine types of devotional service. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam. What a famous verse. Hearing, chanting, remembering. Then worshipping, offering prayers, or serving the lotus feet, worshipping, serving the lotus feet, worshipping, offering prayers, serving, a different type of serving, then befriending, and then surrendering everything. That's what there is. That's devotional service. There's nothing else, really. But first is Shravanam, hearing. You can't chant until you've heard. So first you hear, then you chant, and then when you chant, of course, you also hear. And then when you chant and hear, then you remember. And when you chant and hear and remember, you get inspiration to serve the lotus feet. And there's a succession like this, progression. Right, so this is the first instruction. Now hear, not now worship a deity, or now take prasadam, or now do whatever, something else. First of all, hear. And what do you hear? You hear about practicing devotional service, the practice. And then you hear about the practice in full consciousness, mind-focused, full consciousness of the Lord, mind attached to the Lord. In other words, Krishna consciousness, being conscious of Krishna. This term, Krishna consciousness, is quite a remarkable term. If you just, we may take it for granted to some degree, but if you think, what does this term, Krishna consciousness, mean? Well, in very simple and clear terms, it means being conscious of Krishna. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Being conscious. That's Krishna consciousness, obviously. We have to be conscious of Krishna, aware of Krishna's presence. Yes. Not Krishna unconscious. That we're conscious of other things and we're, deeply absorbed in other things. What's that got to do with Krishna consciousness? So then hear, practice, be in full consciousness of Krishna with mind attached to Krishna, and then you can know Krishna fully, free from doubt, no doubts. Asamshayam in the Sanskrit. Samshaya means doubt. Asamshaya means with no doubts at all. Yes. Asamshayam samagram. Asamshaya, no doubts, and samagram, completely. Oh, really intense. So there you have it, devotees. That's the idea. We're going to say more, but that's the idea, what Lord Krishna is presenting in this verse. And that is the essence of what is Krishna consciousness, what is pure devotional service. And Krishna is pointing it out so clearly right at the beginning of the section on devotional service. Now, I want to make another point which is not noted here. Perhaps many of you have not even heard about this point. It's just a very interesting point, as far as I'm concerned, that there Srila Prabhupada lectured, of course, every day. generally every day at least once. And so many of those classes were recorded, and all those recordings were then typed out, transcribed is the English word, typed out, and then printed in books. You can get books. Of course, it's so much, or all of it, or so much is available on computer, in the Veda base also, the folio. But you can get the books too. All of Prabhupada's classes on Bhagavad Gita, on Srimad Bhagavatam, like this. So now, devotees, Srila Prabhupada, of all verses in all of his books, particularly Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Nectar of Devotion. But anyway, the thing is this, listen to this. Of all verses from all of the books, this verse, chapter 7, verse 1, is the verse which Srila Prabhupada lectured on more than any other verse. Note that. I mean, I don't think it's going to be in the exam, but it's just, I think it's a very interesting point. There are recorded, that we know of, it's around 24 lectures on this verse. The verse which was lectured on by Prabhupada, the second most, was chapter 2, verse 13. And on that verse, it's either 13 or 14 recorded classes. But this verse, 24, about 24, might be 25. It's around, 24 or 25. And that means something. It means something. It means that Prabhupada gave special importance, attributed special importance to this verse. It must mean. So anyway, it's just something to note and to be aware of, I would say. So the whole process, as we said, is based on hearing. And what I'll say more about this verse is that there are, if you have a look at the last paragraph, basically, or second to last, you see, obviously, you see that Srila Prabhupada has quoted 4 verses. Is it 4? Whoops. Is it 4 verses? 5 verses, actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 2, verses 17 to 21. 17 to 21. And what is this about? Well, let's read these verses and just see. Because obviously they're important for Prabhupada to quote all of them. Sure, that's significant. So, to hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures, or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita, is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who's dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best-wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lusts and avarice are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of asamshayam samagram, understanding of the supreme absolute truth personality of Godhead. Anyway, my point here is to note how Srila Prabhupada emphasizes hearing, 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 hearing. It's so foundational. It's so foundational that hearing about Krishna from Vedic literatures or hearing from him, it's righteous activity. For one who hears about Krishna, then Krishna becomes your friend and purifies the devotee who constantly hears. In this way you develop transcendental knowledge. Then as you hear more, you become fixed in devotional service. You get the idea, right? You get the idea. Hearing is being emphasized. And there's one other little point which I'd like to bring up, which isn't directly mentioned in the purport, but I would like to just refer to the verse in that same second chapter of the first canto of the Bhagavatam. It's verse 16, which comes, in other words, immediately before the first verse, which is quoted there in the purport. So this is also, it's a really good verse in the same regard. Shushusho Shradhadanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahatsevya Vipra Punyatirtha Nishevanat. O twice-born sages, by serving those devotees who are completely free from all vice, great service is done. By such service, one develops an affinity for hearing the messages of Vasudeva, of Krishna. That's an important verse also, and it's just connected up with these verses Prabhupada's quoted, which are emphasizing hearing so much. The thing is, in this verse 16, that previous verse, is that what is being talked about is serving the devotees, particularly those devotees who are freed from all vice, particularly the pure devotees, the advanced devotees. By serving them, one does a very good thing. And then he goes on, by that service, as a result of that service, you develop an affinity, an attachment, it means really, for hearing in Krishna consciousness. Yeah, that's the thing. So, it's an interesting point. You serve the devotees very nicely, very very wonderful devotees, and you serve them very nicely. And what result do you get? You become attracted to hearing about Krishna. Now, how could that be? How does serving the devotees cause an attraction to hearing about Krishna to appear within your heart? You can understand how by eating prasadam, you feel good, or you feel strong, you feel satisfied, your hunger goes. It's obvious. The activity naturally produces the result or the results. But here the activity of serving the devotees produces the result that you now become attracted to hearing about Krishna. What's the connection? What's the connection? The connection is that Krishna, when you serve the devotees, Krishna becomes pleased with you. And then when Krishna is pleased with you, then Krishna thinks, what can I do for you? How can I serve this devotee? Krishna, yes. Serving the devotees pleases Krishna so much, he feels bound. I must help this devotee. I must do it. I must give this devotee, reciprocate. So when he feels like that, what type of reciprocation, what does he feel is a suitable thing to give? To give you an attraction for hearing about him. It's a nice point, which then goes on and is explained in these other verses which we just read, which are there in the purport. So it's a very important point. It's just touch trinu. We must hear. We must cultivate hearing. We must put hearing first. Or, even if it's difficult to do, but we must work on it. At least we must accept and understand within our hearts that really it is like that. And even if the mind may wander, or one may possibly feel attracted to some other activity in Krishna consciousness, but still we should know hearing about Krishna is the first and main thing, and try and work on it. Yeah. So there you go, devotees. And Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. Well, what can you say? There you go. We're off to a good start there. Let's go on to the next verse, verse 2. And Lord Krishna just said we must hear from him. He's got something he wants to say. It's obviously of just the most extreme importance. So what is it now? This is verse 2. I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge, both phenomenal and numinous. This being known, nothing further shall remain for you to know. Well, that's pretty substantial, isn't it? Just hear about this, what I'm going to tell you. And once you've heard about this, there's nothing else for you to know. It's like, it's the king of knowledge. It's at least the essence of knowledge. We use the term sometimes quintessential in English. Quintessential means the essence of the essence. You can't get more essential. The essence of the essence. So in principle, in simple terms, this is like a sutra, or if I may use a computer term, this is sort of like a zipped file. I'm sure many of you know what a zipped file is, that there's some data, maybe some knowledge on a computer, or maybe some music. It's on the computer, and you can, in order to transfer it from one computer to another, you can reduce the size of the file by zipping it. And so a file which may be 10 megabytes, it can come down to 5 or 3 or 2. You know, there's some very radical forms of compression where a lot of information can be reduced to very, very little. This verse is something like that, if we understand what Krishna is saying. So phenomenal knowledge, which is both phenomenal and numinous. Well, what are these terms? What's the idea of these terms? What does this word numinous mean even? It's not a common word. Phenomenal means knowledge about the material world. Numinous means divine, transcendental, spiritual knowledge, which is above and beyond just the material composition of this world. And Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, complete knowledge includes knowledge of the phenomenal world, this world we're living in, the spirit behind it, that's the numinous part, or part of the numinous part, and the source of both of them. This is transcendental knowledge. So in other words, what Prabhupada is saying is that Lord Krishna is going to tell us in Bhagavad Gita, not just right now, but throughout Bhagavad Gita, he's going to tell us all sorts of things about the material world. And we'll see as we go on, all sorts of things, gosh, amazing things about the material world, how it's composed, how it functions, what effects it has, what are the results of becoming influenced by it, its creation, its destruction, its maintenance, in so many ways in Bhagavad Gita, and what to speak of in Srimad Bhagavatam. But just in Bhagavad Gita, in so many ways, the material world is analyzed and presented to us for what it is from a Krishna conscious perspective, so that we don't just become appreciative, oh, the material world is nice, the material world is interesting. No. But so we can understand, at the end we'll come out thinking, wow, Krishna is so wonderful. Just see how he made this extraordinary material world. He is so amazing to have made this amazing material world. So therefore, we offer our obeisances to him, and we serve him. And then, of course, the spiritual side of things, about the nature of the spirit soul, the nature of the super soul, the nature of the spiritual world, and Krishna in the spiritual world, the nature of the process for getting out of the material world and going back to the spiritual world. So, all these things are going to be explained in Bhagavad Gita, in the rest of Bhagavad Gita. Yes. All of these things in very Krishna conscious terms. So, ultimately, and this is a point that Prabhupada doesn't, anyway, it's a point which both Baladev Vijayabhushan and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur note. And you know, Prabhupada is inferring it, but not saying it right now, at least exactly in as many words. But both of them, Baladev Vijayabhushan, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, both of them, they both say that this phenomenal, well, the Sanskrit words are Gyan and Vigyan. Prabhupada translates Gyan as knowledge of the material world and Vigyan as this numinous knowledge of things beyond the material world, the spiritual things, the soul, the supreme soul, and so on. So they say it's nice. Gyan, of course, they say yes, it's knowledge of the material world. But Vigyan, they both say that ultimately this Vigyan, the spiritual knowledge about the soul, etc., the supreme soul, and so on, this spiritual knowledge ultimately means developing love for Krishna. This is ultimately what this numinous knowledge means. Not that we just cultivate some knowledge about how Krishna does this and that and what is the nature of the soul. Not just that, but it all culminates in a loving relationship with Krishna. And developing that, and then you go back to Krishna, and you go back to Krishna, who is such a lovable person. He's such a lovable person. It's amazing. And during the course of these 6 chapters we're just starting on right now, in a number of places we will see how Krishna is such a lovable person. He's worthy of our love. Just like a child with the mother or father. The mother and father do so much for the child, selflessly. What do they get? The child doesn't pay them. Particularly when the child's really small, then the child is totally helpless. Can't even pass stool and urine in a sort of decent way. It's just... But the parents, particularly the mother, but the parents, they do everything. Just everything. And more than everything. And for many years, they're looking after the child like that, until the child, step by step, is able to become independent. So that rendering of service, selflessly, that deserves to be appreciated. That deserves reciprocation. That deserves love. If someone serves you like that, you should love them. You should serve them back. Also selflessly. So Krishna, like the parents, you can make up a list. It'd be a long list what they did for you, what they've done for you, how they've provided for you food, clothing, shelter, physical protection, education. All these things they've provided. That is worthy of appreciation. So now the thing is, everything culminates with love for Krishna in this whole process of Krishna consciousness, which is being mentioned here in terms of the knowledge involved. The thing is, Krishna has done so much for us. So much. It might be a good idea to make up a list. For example, he gave you your body. It didn't just drop out of the sky. You didn't buy it in a shop with your own money. No, he gave you this body. And he gave you this whole world to do with, more or less as you please. Of course, you should serve him using the different things in this world. But, you know what people do. They just take the material world to be for their satisfaction. Krishna provided it. We didn't buy this world in a shop. Krishna provided it. And even just the knowledge, even the material knowledge. Krishna, later on we'll see, Krishna says, from me comes knowledge, remembrance and forgetfulness, consciousness. This is coming from Krishna. All these things are coming from Krishna. All the facilities we have, the opportunities we have, it's all coming from Krishna. So if anyone deserves to be loved, to be appreciated, deserves to receive some reciprocation, it's Krishna. But sometimes people, even sometimes devotees, forget that I am so obligated to Krishna. I'm so indebted to Krishna. It's just fantastic. People forget, or they don't even think about it. So, but this is Krishna consciousness. Maya Vesha Manoparta, as this verse says. We should think of Krishna. We should hear about Krishna. We should appreciate Krishna and become attached to Krishna. Then from this appreciation, then gratitude, and then love can develop. And this is Krishna consciousness. And this is the essence of Krishna consciousness, which Lord Krishna has just presented to us in these two verses. Okay, so there you go, devotees. We will carry on tomorrow with verse 3. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.